rongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, almost a decade on, it's a yes please from Australia. New Zealand will take in hundreds of refugees from its controversial offshore detention centres. We'll have the details of the deal and reaction. Gisborne remains cut off from the rest of the Motu this evening as foul weather makes its way down the island. The Minister for Emergency Management is live. A suburban Auckland house is sprayed with gunfire in the early hours of the morning, seriously injuring 2 people. COVID rules are loosening, so when will workers trade the trackies for a return to the CBD offices? And the McMonster of a battle between a fast food giant and a tiny German town over takeaway wrappers.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. In a major about turn, Australia has accepted New Zealand's long-standing offer to take 150 refugees annually for 3 years from detention centres in the Pacific. The offer was first made by the former Prime Minister John Key in 2013. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The deal aims to rehome some of the thousands of refugees who've travelled to Australia by boat and then been placed in detention. Initially, it will cover those held on Nauru or currently in Australia for regional processing and will be counted as part of New Zealand's annual intake of 1,500 refugees. Australia's Minister for Home Affairs, Karen Andrews, says the arrangement will not apply to anyone who attempts to illegally enter the country by boat in the future. Till now, Australian authorities have rejected New Zealand's offer, citing concerns that refugees could claim Kiwi citizenship and then return.
Gisborne remains cut off this evening after heavy rain battered the region, causing slips and widespread flooding. Several roads in Tairāwhiti remain impassable, keeping communities north of Tolaga Bay cut off after 2 days of torrential rain. Nearly half a metre of rain fell in the area over 48 hours, but it's stopped for now, allowing contractors to start clearing roads and debris jammed under bridges. State Highway 2 and State Highway 35 between Gisborne and Pōtaka are closed and will remain so overnight. With more heavy rain expected later this evening, Waka Kotahi will decide tomorrow whether to open the road again. It's still not known how many houses are uninhabitable. Some farmers say it's going to cost them millions to repair their properties. A Tolaga Bay family and their dog spent a sleepless night in a motorhome last night, expecting their house to be inundated by floodwaters at any moment. Jane Brooke, who lives near Uawa or Tolaga Bay, says they felt even more vulnerable after communication services were knocked out.
We lost our internet and our cell phone coverage, and so we couldn't keep an eye on the rain radar, which we like to keep an eye on, yes.
Jane Brooke says the storm was a terrifying experience. Some Wairoa residents are evacuating as wild weather lashes Hawke's Bay. The National Emergency Management Agency's Roger Ball says the situation in the region is concerning. He says there's a significant slip in Wairoa and some self-evacuations are underway. A large number of roads are impacted by flooding. Rain eased earlier today, but a further 110 to 150 millimetres of rain is forecast, with a warning in place from 6 this evening. Hawke's Bay Civil Defence is monitoring more than 50 waterways. Heavy rain is also expected in Wairarapa. A councillor says the shooting in Auckland overnight is not thought to be gang-related. Shots were fired on Heatherbank Street in Glen Innes shortly before 3 o'clock in the morning. 2 seriously injured people are awaiting surgery. 3 others are being treated for injuries that are not life-threatening. A 6th suffered minor injuries. Maunga Kiakia Tāmaki Ward councillor Josephine Bartley says it points to drug and alcohol abuse.
What I do know is from our police area commander that they are working hard to identify the offender, that it isn't gang-related, because that was the thing that a lot of our community were contacting me about.
Josephine Bartley says residents have good reason to feel anxious. The police investigation continues. And the police watchdog will begin a review into the police's handling of the occupation and subsequent riot at Parliament grounds. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has received nearly 1,900 complaints relating to both police action and inaction. The review will canvass what intelligence police had access to and used before and during the protest, and police engagement with the likes of iwi and government officials. It will also examine police planning, staff selection and the tactics used in responding to the protest. To sport, and the Crusaders will be able to field a team against the Chiefs this weekend, although coach Scott Robertson admits it wasn't straightforward. Last weekend, the Crusaders were unable to put out a side to play the Blues and their Super Rugby match was postponed.
I felt like we're always going to field a team. It was just the strength and experience of it. The guys that couldn't train, they were right on, they were really clear and we were ready. So as the week built on, we really stuck to a strong side.
The match will be All Black David Havili's 100th game for the Crusaders. The Wellington Phoenix men's football side will get to play at home this season after all. With the dropping of COVID crowd restrictions, the Phoenix, who have been based in Australia all season, will now host the Central Coast Mariners in Wellington at Easter weekend. They then play Western Sydney Wanderers in Auckland a week later. The Phoenix are currently 7th, 3 points outside a top 6 playoff spot. And rain has hampered the Cricket World Cup match in Wellington between the West Indies and South Africa, who are both chasing a place in the semi-finals. The match has been reduced to 26 overs per side, with South Africa 61 for 4 in the 11th over, although play is currently again suspended. In the day-night match in Christchurch, Pakistan a short time ago had limped through to 104 for 9 after 41 overs, batting first against defending champions England. That's the news.
A shooting in Auckland.
There are a number of police parked up. There is tape across one house and armed police guarding it.
A town cut off.
On the ground flooding, not just surface flooding, but homes that had to be evacuated, caravans drifting down the stream.
And a councillor with their shirt off.
I was sweating like a pig, so I took my shirt off, and I must have just pushed the wrong button, I think.
Start your day off right. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next, but first, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland and Auckland, partly cloudy, isolated showers, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon. For the Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Taupo, Waitomo, Taumarunui and Taranaki. Scattered rain at times, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon and becoming mainly fine. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Taihape, periods of rain with some heavy falls from Wairarapa to southern Gisborne. Whanganui to Wellington, scattered rain clearing from tomorrow afternoon. A few showers are forecast for Nelson, Buller and Westland, but they're clearing this afternoon or evening, and you have mainly fine weather tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine and cloudy periods. Rain or drizzle developing this afternoon or evening, then clearing tomorrow morning. Partly cloudy in Fiordland, Otago and Southland. Rain is developing in the west and south tomorrow morning, and a few showers are spreading to Southland and Clutha from tomorrow afternoon. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy with rain developing tonight. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. New Zealand's helping bail Australia out of a long-running controversy over asylum seekers locked up in offshore detention centres. In 2013, it introduced a policy preventing anyone arriving by boat ever settling in Australia. Instead, the asylum seekers were imprisoned in controversial offshore detention centres in Nauru and Manus Island. The centres were widely criticised as inhumane and a breach of international law, with allegations of mistreatment and abuse. Under a deal that's taken years to broker, New Zealand will take 150 refugees a year for 3 years from Nauru or other makeshift detention centres as part of our refugee quota. Meanwhile, Australia is sticking by its border protection policy and says the deal doesn't change anything. Joining us now is Immigration Minister Chris Whawhoi. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Kia ora.
This offer was made, almost a decade ago, right? So what's changed? Why have they accepted it now?
Look, I think for some time the likes of the US and Canada have had similar resettlement schemes in place. Late in 2020, I believe, as those arrangements are kind of beginning to come to an end, Australia reached out to see whether or not the 150 offer that was made back in 2013, as you say, was still open. It was. we took some time to make sure that we worked through that. Because we wanted to make sure that the likes of anyone that comes as part of this bilateral agreement comes through the UNHCR process. There was an issue with those who were in the likes of Nauru and those who were, as Australia says, temporarily in Australia as well, and whether or not they'd be eligible. And we were able to come to an arrangement more recently to make sure that could happen. So the commitment is to 3 years, and obviously I think making sure that we, when we made the offer initially, continue our commitment to dealing with regional responsibilities in a humanitarian sense.
Okay, there's a lot in that. So I understand this required cabinet sign-off, did it? And when did that happen? Yeah,
about a little over a month ago is my recollection.
So how come you're only announcing it now?
Well, I was just getting to that, Lisa. There were still some issues that Australia had to broker with UNHCR. The cabinet decision was that the offer of 150 that was made some time ago was still open, but the bottom line is it had to come through the UNHCR process, and Australia had to go through some discussions with the UNHCR to see who might be eligible because of that.
Right, so UNHCR will screen and choose these people and they come under our refugee quota, right?
Correct.
Are there any riders on this deal? Once they become permanent residents or citizens here in New Zealand, is there anything stopping them returning to Australia?
Well, any border decisions about entering Australia are up to them. We have said very strongly as we're working through this issue that these people will arrive in New Zealand as refugees and become permanent residents, and after a period of time become citizens. Our express will and request is that all citizens have the same rights if they've got New Zealand citizenship. There's obviously an issue that Australia is working through. The border decisions around entry are theirs, and I think we'll leave that discussion for them.
But you have made it clear what your expectations are.
Oh, look, if people are New Zealand permanent residents and citizens, they should have the same rights that everyone should have. At the end of the day, though, just like New Zealand decides who comes through their border, Australia makes that decision about its border.
Is there any quid pro quo here? Do we get anything for this? Like, for example, are they going to stop expelling 501s from Australia in exchange?
Look, it's obviously another area where we've made our position extremely clear about our disapproval of that policy from Australia at a high level. That doesn't necessarily dilute our commitment that we make to our humanitarian efforts. There's no quid pro quo. The humanitarian efforts and offer that was made 9 years ago is still there and obviously come to a fruition with today's announcement.
These people have fled horrendous circumstances, some of them, and they've landed in potentially equally as hostile environments in Australia. They've been there for years and years, some of them. What contribution is Australia going to make to these people's ongoing care? Because I imagine some of them will be deeply traumatised and may need specialised assistance.
Look, some of these people have been in the Australian system for close to 10 years now. They'll get all the support that we give to refugees who come from equally troubling situations, whether it be the situations that they've had through, or the experience that they've had over the last 9 years through this process, or also the likes of Afghanistan, or maybe in the future Ukraine. They'll get all the support.
Minister, I understand our commitment. But he pātai anō, my question again is, what's Australia kicking in to help these people out when they come to New Zealand? Or is that it? They just wash their hands of the situation?
No, we've made a commitment to 150. It's been there for some time. We've now come to an arrangement. We're taking responsibility for these individuals that become permanent residents of New Zealand, and over time citizens. We'll take responsibility, as we do with all refugees, to make sure that they're settled here well.
Okay, so these people deserve a home and some hope, but do you have any reservations about the fact that potentially you are allowing Australia to shirk its duties as a good citizen of the world?
Look, we made an offer, and a genuine offer, back in 2013 under the Key government. It's endured a change of administration to assist in the humanitarian effort and our responsibilities in the region. More recently, we've been able to progress those talks more.
But are they shirking their duties, Minister? That's the nub of my question.
We made an offer to Australia, and they have taken it up. Now, we will take, as we do with all refugees, responsibility for them and give them the opportunity to make a new home here in New Zealand.
Where are they going to live, these people?
Look, so there are places around the country, I think off the top of my head, the likes of Auckland, Hamilton, Palmerston North, Masterton, I think the likes of Timboroa and Invercargill, just to name a few, where we are focused on placing all refugees. So when they arrive, as they arrive, and we hope to have some of them in the Refugee Resettlement Centre in Māngere by the end of the year. They'll go through that process and we'll begin the process of housing them, as we do with other refugees that we do generally as well.
Thanks for your time this evening. That's Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy. Ho mai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback on this issue. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. We're taking these refugees, asylum seekers from Australia as part of our quota. Should we be taking them in addition to that? And what does it mean in terms of Australia's commitments and whether they have any ongoing responsibilities? Text me on Pātui Mai on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is almost 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Gisborne remains cut off this evening. Roads are closed all around it after heavy rain battered the region, causing slips and widespread flooding. The sun was shining for most of the day, but slip after slip still covers the roads all over the region. Residents are now bracing for even more downpours. Our reporter Tom Kitchen and camera operator Angus Drever took a trip around.
This is what Gisborne, Tokomaru Bay and surrounding areas are dealing with. Bridges washed out, totally destroyed, key transport routes in and out of this area gone. Farms have been flooded, rivers burst through here, turning them into lakes, stock forced to shelter on top of hills. A river has breached and marched its way across the land and sits on the edge of these tennis courts. Further up the coast, debris is washed up on beaches. Brown rivers snake all across the region. A truck dropping off huge rocks to protect the banks. For Jane Brooke, who lives near Uawa or Tolaga Bay, last night was terrifying.
Well, pretty scary and freaky. I live beside the river and we were wondering whether we'd have to evacuate.
She was afraid their home might flood, so last night her family and dog stayed somewhere slightly different.
We've got a stop bank around our property and the driveway's got a hump on it, so we've got a motorhome. We parked that up there overnight. So
how was that? Yeah?
Well, we were still awake at 3 o'clock because the rain, just kept raining. This is last night. The night before was, it's been pretty scary.
And then other services went down.
We lost our internet and our cell phone coverage, and so we couldn't keep an eye on the rain radar, which we like to keep an eye on, yes.
Emergency services were on standby in the village today. Firefighters were standing ready at the station, along with St John's specialist vehicles to help locals if they needed emergency medical care as the roads are shut. Officer in charge of the Tolaga Bay Fire Brigade, Andrew Shelton, hasn't got much sleep.
Very, very little due to the thunder and lightning, just keeping the whole community awake. So, we're all on tenterhooks at that stage.
And he says his mates in Tokomaru Bay are managing, even though they're further out.
They're doing okay, like everyone at the moment, feeling a little bit isolated, but everyone's hanging in there and doing their part as needed.
As for Tolaga Bay man Terry Hall, the last few days haven't been out of the ordinary.
No big deal to me because I've lived here so long, really.
He says it's concerning these kind of events seem to be happening a bit more often, but there's stuff you can do.
I guess they have been over the years, but they do. Nature also heals up in time. If you help it by putting grass seed and planting trees, that's the best we can do. There's only one thing you can count on in life, and that's change.
But there's more to come. Tairāwhiti is set for heavy rain and wind for the next week. And the roads and land with all the slips, debris and damage have to be fixed to get this region moving again.
And the Minister for Emergency Management, Kiri Allan, has been out surveying the damage in her East Coast electorate and joins us now. Kia ora, Minister.
Hey, good afternoon, Lisa. How things?
Very well at my end, but it sounds pretty rough where you are. I understand that you're near the Pakaru Bridge in Tokomaru Bay. Can you tell us what it looks like?
That's exactly where I am, Lisa. So right now I'm standing at the edge of what once was a bridge and now is a gaping hole, I'd say, of about 20 metres that stretches over, as one of the critical pieces of infrastructure here in Tokomaru Bay. It's the connector from one side of the coast to the other. So some significant damage that we've seen here in the region, and I think in particular I'm struck because it's only 9 months ago that this little community of Tukumaru Bay underwent some ferocious flooding, and it's it's a little bit heartbreaking going back to visit some of those families, some of those people that have had it really tough over the last 9 months, just rebuilding in some of their homes, the school here, and seeing people again in this state. It's a little upsetting.
So, practically, what does that mean with the bridge out, Minister? What does it mean for locals on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, right now, there's a couple of things. So you can't get from the southern end of Tukumaru to the northern end. There is literally a 20-metre gap in the middle of State Highway 35. So in terms of getting groceries and the like, there's been a range of initiatives that have been undertaken here by the coasters, including rope and buckets and the like, horses crossing the river with bags. But from a more practical lens, my lens, I guess, is that we've been able to provide some support through to the Gisborne District Council to enable them to be able to undertake immediate welfare. So whether that be things like making sure that there is sufficient groceries here for those that are isolated and can't access food, making sure that there's roofs over people's heads and the like. So that's,
are you talking about the $175,000 that you've kicked into the Merrill Fund? Is that what you're kind of picking it will be used for and want it to be used for?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Those are exactly the types of things that we imagine it will be used for. It's immediate relief fund. And then there's the more structural issues, of course, like the big amount of road that's out here. So I know that...
so is there a temporary bridge? Sorry to interrupt, Minister, but obviously that's a really big practical hurdle for locals, that they're cut off and that highway is cut off. So what do you know about whether a temporary bridge is coming, what can be done, how long the fix will take?
I've spoken with the team at Gisborne District Council this earlier today. They are looking at a number of options and making assessments, I think, is the best way to do it. I know that they've been closely engaged with Waka Potahi, NZTA, who have been very focused on whether they need to get an interim solution up or go towards something more substantive. So, look, it's the first kind of break that they've had in the weather for a little period of time. I know that they will be putting those options through ASAP, but in the interim, what the focus now is in this immediate response is just making sure that the basics are available to locals: food, bread, a roof overhead and the like. But these more critical infrastructure issues, these have to be sorted pretty ASAP, and I know that the team are working on that right now.
Minister, the other thing is, it doesn't rain, it pours. They've got COVID on the coast at the moment and they're getting hit pretty hard. So how is that complicating things?
Yeah, it's been quite a challenge managing a dual crisis, I think is the best way to say it. I've just spoken with the lead hapu coordinator here, Lil. I think fair to say people are pretty exhausted. We always say that coasters are resilient, of course they are. But she's a challenging time when you're managing two major incidents like this. Incredible amount of work's gone in to make sure that people have been kept safe. I know that coasters up and down the East Coast have made sure that there's really good processes when they were evacuating communities, making sure that, that there wasn't a lot of crossover between those that were infected and those that weren't. And so I just got to take my hat off to the way that they've organised and managed themselves here. But the reality is that there still is high need here on the coast as a consequence of, managing both Omicron outbreak and, of course, these severe weather incidents.
Thanks for joining us, Minister. That's Minister for Emergency Management, Kiri Allan. Now, the weather system bringing the torrential rain to Tairāwhiti is moving down the island. An orange alert has been issued for Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Met Service meteorologist David Miller is on the line. David, where's it hitting right now, this weather system?
We have had a bit of a reprieve this afternoon, but the rain is just starting to set in now in Wairarapa and soon to be into Hawke's Bay shortly this evening.
And how bad do you anticipate it's going to be in that part of the world?
We do have a heavy rain warning out for Hawke's Bay, and we expect a further 90 to 130 millimetres of rain to accumulate on top of what has already fallen. So that's from the time period from 7 p.m. Until 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. That's for Hawke's Bay.
Yeah, so is that the orange alert?
That is the orange alert.
Yeah, so for people who aren't so familiar with the system, what does that actually mean, orange? Does that mean brace, it could be bad?
Yeah, so we issue orange alerts for our severe weather warnings. So whenever we have a severe weather warning, it will be a standard orange alert. And if it becomes an extreme weather event like what we've seen in Gisborne these last couple of days, then we will upgrade the orange warning to a red warning.
Okay, so in terms of the Gisborne area and Tairawhiti, in terms of Gisborne and the Tairawhiti area, can you give us an idea of how much rain they have had over there over a period of time?
Yeah, okay, so Tapuia has had about 400 millimetres of rain. So some rain gauges have recorded about 400 millimetres of rain. What that means is that's four... well, basically... you can expect, basically in a standard bathtub, there'd be about 150 litres of water in a standard bathtub. So 400 millimetres of rain means about 2.5 bathtubs in every square metre.
Yeah,
which
so
is quite a lot of water.
It's a hell of a lot of water. And in terms of the time of year, how does it compare to what you've seen in previous years?
Okay, it's not the wettest March for Gisborne ever so far.
Right.
So the wettest March was in 1944 when 375 millimetres of rain fell at Gisborne. So we've had 198 millimetres of rain at Gisborne Airport so far by comparison. So it's still a heck of a lot of rain, and there is more to come in the next few days. So... call back at the end of the month maybe to see if it is the wettest March.
Gosh, I hope not. Hey, thanks for joining us. That's David Miller, who is from the Met Service there. It is 25 minutes past 5. Police have been combing a property in the Auckland suburb of Glen Innes after 6 people were injured by gunfire earlier this morning. They say people approached a house around 3 o'clock and fired a number of rounds, seriously injuring 2 people who are now awaiting surgery and 3 others are in a moderate condition. A 6th suffered minor injuries. A 21-year-old who fled the scene has been charged with possession of cannabis, although the police don't know if that has any connection to the firearms incident yet. Katie Todd reports.
An early morning wake-up call for some residents on Heatherbank Street.
I heard a couple gunshots and then they just sped away in their car.
Neighbours say they heard a woman screaming and swearing before people appeared to flee the scene. This morning, one house was cordoned off, guarded by armed police as children rode their bikes in the driveway next door. Detectives in protective forensic clothing have been carrying out a scene examination while the injured recover in Auckland City Hospital. Neighbours told RNZ they're in shock, describing the occupants of the house in question as a lovely family.
Staying across the road from someone for like so many years, like you get to know them, you know. But when I woke up this morning and seen the cops, I was like, wow, what happened?
That's Stephanie Palmere, who's grown up on the street and says the occupants of the house have been there her whole life.
It's really strange because the boy that lives there, he's my age and we were raised together. So it's kind of a shock to me, eh?
Maungakia Kia Tamaki Ward councillor Josephine Bartley says the shooting wasn't gang-related, but it does point to alcohol and drug issues rearing their head in the community. She says residents have good reason to feel a bit anxious about what happened.
I think that's a good idea for our residents, just to lay low and to keep safe around there. I've texted my cousins that live on that street.
Phyllis Palmere says she's not sticking around. Today she was collecting belongings from her place over the road and temporarily moving to a friend's place nearby until it has all settled down.
It's shaking when you see all the cops out. You know that people actually got hurt.
The police say they want to hear from anyone with information about what happened.
And that was Katie Todd reporting. A number of you getting in touch. On Gisborne's weather, we were just talking to Kiri Allan, Minister for, what do they call it now? Emergency events or emergency services. This person, Pess, says it's awful to hear about what's happening in Gisborne. 3 months rain in under 24 hours. This is climate change happening before our very eyes. On the subject of New Zealand taking refugees from Australia. Now, these people are coming from Nauru or temporary detention centres on the mainland. They may have been transferred there from these offshore detention centres for medical treatment. Sandra says we can't house our own people. Where are they going to live? David from Wellington's got in touch to say, will Australia stop sending their 501s in return? Well, we did ask the Minister that, and he says there's no quid pro quo, no deal with Australia over that, although they've made their feelings heard, he says. More traumatised people coming to New Zealand better get on with fixing the mental health crisis, another listener says. Yvonne says, how come there is housing for refugees but not for New Zealand families? Any idea how much resentment this issue causes? And Mike from Auckland's got in touch to say, so the Aussies, and this is in quote marks, put out the trash, 501s, and we thank them by taking their refugee problem. It's a difficult conundrum though, isn't it, Mike? Because if we don't take them, what happens to them? They stay in the equivalent of MIQ hotels for months and sometimes years. And another person says, happy to swap the refugees for idiots protesting at Parliament any day. And Maggie from Devonport has got in touch. Now, Maggie says that she is delighted that New Zealand's offer to Australia has finally been accepted. Thank you, New Zealand, but our commitment to refugee resettlement is woeful. We come in at 95th in the world. As a good global citizen and to meet our international obligations, we need to commit to 4,000 annually, and certainly to meet our current aspirations of 1,500 annually. And that's from Maggie. Thanks for your feedback. Keep it coming. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. E te iwi e hariaki nei e a Checkpoint. Is it time to trade the kitchen commute and endless Zoom calls for the face-to-face actual office time? We talked to Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. The easing of COVID restrictions have left some of the country's most vulnerable feeling plain uneasy, and the McMonster of a battle over takeaway wrappers. Don't forget, you can let us know your thoughts on anything you've heard on the programme this evening by texting us on 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita pita kōrero.
The Immigration Minister says Australia rekindled New Zealand's offer to take some refugees being housed in detention camps, and Cabinet signed off on the plan a month ago. New Zealand will take 150 refugees annually for 3 years from Australian detention centres. Australian authorities have previously rejected New Zealand's offer, citing concerns refugees could claim New Zealand citizenship and then return. Minister Chris Farfoy told Checkpoint some of these people have been detained for 9 years, and upon arrival they'll become permanent residents and be entitled to all the care they require. Civil Defence in Tairāwhiti says it still can't reach many cut-off communities to assess damage from the torrential rain of the last 2 days. Te Puia, Tokomaru and Tolaga Bay have borne the brunt of the weather, which forced 150 people to evacuate. Minister for Emergency Management, Kiri Allan, told Checkpoint she has witnessed significant damage in the region. She says it's heartbreaking that Tokomaru Bay only 9 months ago suffered similar damage. State Highway 35 will remain closed overnight between Gisborne and Pōtaka. The weather system is moving down the island. An orange alert has been issued for Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Some Wairoa residents are evacuating as the wild weather lashes Hawke's Bay. The National Emergency Management Agency's Roger Ball says the situation in the region is concerning. State Highway 2 between Wairoa and Napier will remain closed overnight, as will State Highway 38 northeast of Frasertown. And a number of local roads in the Wairoa district are shut due to flooding, slips and fallen trees. The police watchdog has received more than 1,900 complaints relating to the recent protest and occupation at Parliament grounds. The IPCA is now reviewing how police handled events. And the US President Joe Biden has arrived in Brussels for an emergency NATO meeting and G7 summit to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO is expected to agree to deploy troop reinforcements to Eastern Europe. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei, and it is time for business news. Ko taku hoa in nei, ko Nona Peltier. Nona, a Westpac Bank economic report suggests the jobs market will continue to tighten in the coming months. So what's the forecast?
Yeah, so the Westpac index for employment confidence shows there's optimism in the labour market, and it's at its highest level since, I guess, the June 2019. So there you go. But despite that, people are really worried about their wages lagging behind the inflation rate. And so the cost of living is becoming a big issue for workers. The market is tight. So now there's going to be more pressure on wage growth, demands for increases in pay and so on. Michael Gordon, who's the acting chief economist at Westpac, says that labor market tightness is likely going to lead to a further drop in the unemployment rate. We're at 3.2% now. He says there's more pressure on the market than ever, and at the same time, that wage growth there's pressure on that too.
And Nona, the High Court has handed out hefty fines to a couple of shareholders in Oceania Natural. What is that, and what's the reason for the decision?
Right, so back in the day when we used to have the small market index, the small market at the NZX, it was called the Next Market. This one particular company called Oceania Natural, which sold health supplements and honey, they listed in 2016, March 31st, and not long later, a couple of their shareholders, including one who was also a director, but the two of them, these two particular folks, were also accountants. They took action to manipulate the market price of the shares, and they admitted that they had done that. And so 6 years on now, I guess, they've appeared in the High Court, and they have been fined a total of, more than $300,000. One of the people who admitted this manipulation of the market was a fellow named Sean Meng. He was fined $180,000, and that's because he was also a director of the company. And the other folk was Sam Kian, who was fined $130,000. The Financial Markets Authority says this is the kind of fine that people should be expecting for market manipulation. They're saying that it's really a serious offense and should be treated as such. And so that's not the last of it, though. There was a couple of other members of this a firm who are still before the courts. They defended their case at trial earlier this month, and that decision has been reserved.
Let's take a gallop around the markets, Nona.
Okay, so yesterday we talked about Fisher and Paykel. It dropped something like 8% yesterday, another 4.5% today. So that dragged the market down 1/3%. That was a 43-point drop to 12,018. And the New Zealand dollar is steady. It's been hanging on at 69.6 US cents, 93.3 Australian, and 52.7 British pence. And by the way, oil is at $122 US a barrel.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite and Nona Peltier there with Business News. After months at home, workers can trade the trackies and kitchen commute for a return to the actual office, with the government ending most mandates from early April. The question is, will they? Some of our largest companies, Spark, Vodafone, Auckland Council, said today it will take them some time to carry out a health and safety risk assessment and talk to their staff about a return. Until then, the downtown coffee shops and retailers will just have to wait. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff joins me now. Kia ora, Phil. Are you back in the actual office, not just, the kitchen table office?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Well, I was at home compulsorily for 8 or 9 days when I contracted COVID myself, but I am now back officially in the office, and my office is basically working on a, half the office in, half the office working at home on a, day by day basis, so that if we do get COVID in the office, everybody doesn't come down with it. But the nature of our work is that we can work pretty much effectively from home. I have more difficulty with that because of poor broadband at home. But at the point at which it's deemed safe for everybody to come back in, I'll look forward to that, because working at home is one thing, but yet the social interaction, the casual conversations, the coffee together and chewing the fat together, those are really an important part of how we do our jobs.
Well, the government is indicating that things are safe, and they're raising inside limits, in restaurants and what have you, to 200 people, which for a lot of offices is a signal that they can be together in office space. Do you want businesses in the downtown area to call their workers back?
Yeah, look, I think that will wait until we've just got over the surge in Omicron, and all the figures are looking pretty positive at the moment that Auckland is leading the way with the numbers coming down. I think we're up to about 12,000 a day at one stage, and that's down to less than 4,000. I'm keen for people to get back. I make the call in my own office, but I don't make the call for council as a whole. The chief executive does that, but in the discussions we've had, he's indicated that as soon as the risk assessment shows that it makes sense for people to come back, he'd like to see them back at work. Now, that might not mean that some aspects of the working from home, maybe, people do 4 days in the office and a day at home if that demonstrates to work well for the council and for its workers. I don't think we'll go back to the old normal, but I think it does make a lot of sense to bring people back into work so that they can get all those benefits I talked about, with social interaction.
Yeah, so how do you convince business to get their workers back? Because some employees might not want to come. Might be cheaper for them to operate from home, and any number of gains that they've seen from work from home. And then on the other hand, you've got businesses downtown that rely on office workers.
Yeah, look, I don't think you can do it. There's no way you can compel people to do that. It'll be their free choice as employers, employees, to reach an agreement as to whether they work from home or work from the office. And, I don't think you'd want it any other way. But I think,
I understand that, Phil, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as Mayor of the city, you would appreciate that basically the downtown area has been gutted through this pandemic, and some of the life has gone out of it. Right. So as the mayor of a once vibrant city, do you not want to see that return?
Yeah, look, we all want to see more people back in the city centre, and that will come from a variety of things. It'll come partly from workers returning to the office, but some of the things that have been signalled are really important that have come from government. I mean, getting working holiday visas back. We had 40,000 people across New Zealand on working holiday visas. Now, a good percentage of those ended up in Auckland for some of that time. That'll make a huge difference, and they're able to return right now. In just over between 2 and 3 weeks, we'll have visitors back from Australia, and a couple of weeks after that, we'll have visitors back internationally from visa waiver centres. From countries, I should say. We'll have the first wave of the international students coming back, another 5,000 international students. All of those things breathe life back into the city centre in Auckland. But let me just mention one thing, because I was at it today. We had an unrestricted outdoor rally to welcome the announcement that the World Rally Championship, Car Rally Championship, is coming to New Zealand, to Auckland for the first time in 10 years. And they'll be headquartered, guess where, down on the waterfront where we had the America's Cup races. That's going to bring 34,000 visitor nights to the city. It's going to advertise Auckland as a destination to 80 million broadcast audience around the globe. So, our council agencies are working closely with events organisers to try to bring these events back, to bring life back to the city. Rally enthusiasts will love it, but so will the hospitality and the accommodation industry.
Thanks for your time, Phil. That's Phil Goff, the Auckland Mayor there. Omicron cases have surged among Māori, with tangata whenua now having the highest rates. As another pandemic inequity emerges, the Health Ministry is again defending its response for Māori. Jamie Tahana reports.
35 in every 1,000 Māori have been infected with COVID-19, the highest rate of infection in the country. That compares to 28 per 1,000 for Pacifica and 21 for Pākehā and Asian communities. But Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield says overall There's been a decrease in the number of Māori cases, 27,000 this week, down from last week's 35,000.
Despite that drop in case numbers, there's been an increase during that week in the number of Māori who were hospitalised. It was 232 in that week to the 20th of March, compared with 202 the week prior. Again, we always tend to see this lag in hospitalisations behind case numbers.
The decline is steadiest in Auckland, but further south, the wave is still building. Flood-soaked Tairawhiti is now the outbreak's epicentre, 44 cases per 1,000 people. Rewetiro Peha is the head of Gisborne Māori health provider Turanga Health. He says the region's in a perfect storm.
Before we know it, boom, there's rain clouds amassing and now we're working with floods and so she's been all on. It's put more tension into that sort of spaces. People have, still whānau are isolating. Now it's definitely put the pressure on the support services, the systems.
Just like every other stage of the pandemic, an inequity is emerging yet again. Having been assailed by Māori health providers and the Waitangi Tribunal during Delta last year, Dr Bloomfield says things are much improved this time round.
It's an ongoing effort. Actually, Māori infection rates in this outbreak were slower to start off, so they were lower and they just started to increase and over the last week or two have surpassed the rates of other ethnic groups. So we will see those Māori rates come down as the outbreak makes its way through those areas of the motu where there are higher Māori populations.
Sentiments backed up by Deputy Director General for Māori Health, John Whanga.
I'd put it this way, I think there are still pockets of the country where we have to do better to increase access to vaccination services and COVID-related services. But also we've built some strengths and some foundations. If you look at the range of mobilised services we now have in place compared to 2 years ago, the different ways we're delivering is a huge improvement on where we were 2 years ago.
John Whanga says the ministry's in constant consultation with Māori. It's much more nimble, it says, with getting resources, including vaccines and rapid antigen tests out there. But the Māori surge has come right as the government eases restrictions. First tomorrow with gathering limits, and then with QR codes and vaccine passports. Mr Whanga was asked if he's comfortable with that.
We have confidence that off the back of that advice that the settings we're moving to are going to enable us to move to an environment which is a bit different from where we've been in the past, but still have the relevant protective measures in place to protect our people.
In Tairawhiti, Rewetiro Peha says there's a certain ambivalence about the changes. Right now, his small provider is under the pump. But he says support is coming through to Turanga Health, although he knows other providers are still having issues.
For us, we've been quite privileged that we've been able to be at the forefront of the design and the lead and having the preparedness to front a lot of the initiatives rather than be a recipient of. And for us, we see that in the uptake of the tamariki vaccination and the booster vaccination.
Rewetiro Peha says they'll keep doing what they've been doing for 2 years, supporting whānau. Even amid the downpours last night, they vaccinated 60 tamariki.
Some of the country's most at-risk people say the government is trading off their safety by easing restrictions so soon. From the 5th of April, vaccine passports won't be required anymore and many mandates will be scrapped. Our reporter Kirsty Frame has been speaking with those who are most vulnerable if they catch COVID.
Trying to keep your immunocompromised husband and toddlers protected from COVID is hard enough without the easing of restrictions. A rural mother who didn't want to be named says the government has pulled the rug from underneath them.
We felt safe before and now we don't feel safe. We've done everything right, but this drop in the rules, the drop in the stance and, the whole attitude change from the government, it's really quite gutting.
Her 12-year-old son, who spends half his time with his unvaccinated dad, is worried he'll bring the virus into their home.
If it enters our house, it's just going to be a nightmare. We don't know how we're going to cope. We won't get services out here that will replace the services we have. We've called the assistance help in the area for people who have COVID, and they're just scratching their heads and going, look, we just don't even know how we'd be able to help you.
She worries the situation will get worse if cases rise and other restrictions ease. Taranaki woman Erica Perry lives with Miller's syndrome, which affects the development of the face and limbs. She's someone who can always see the bright side, but in the last few weeks she's been anxious, keeping inside and away from people. She says it's the reality for people who are vulnerable.
I do understand that they can't keep all these measures forever because it's not sustainable for the rest of the world. I guess we're the minority. So it sounds a bit crass, but we're kind of the lower denomination, the lower class that kind of gets forgotten about.
Erica doesn't know how hard COVID will hit her immune system if she gets it. She says in the whole pandemic she hasn't had to be as cautious as she does now, and it's exhausting. The Disabled Persons Assembly are still reeling from yesterday's announcement. Chief Executive Prudence Walker says people with disabilities are less safe as restrictions ease.
The things that provided some safety for the population that we're talking about are being reduced, and we're so far not seeing any specific measures in place to keep those people safe.
A recent survey by Age Concerns shows a third of elderly people are spending more time inside to avoid the virus. Chief Executive Karen Billings-Jensen says that will be a challenge.
As we lessen the protections, it might mean that more people are becoming more isolated. So again, what we want to remind people of is the need to be connected.
And while the vaccine mandate will remain for aged care and disability workers, it's being dropped for early childhood education. Amanda Colston of Whānau Manaaki Kindergarten says anxiety has spiked among parents.
What they've said is that we had a layer of reassurance that sending our child to kindergarten meant that people were fully vaccinated.
Amanda Colston says she and many others want the government to reconsider scrapping vaccine mandates for early childhood educators.
The US has officially declared that Russian troops have committed war crimes in Ukraine, days after President Joe Biden called Vladimir Putin a war criminal. It comes as Mr Biden arrives in Europe for emergency meetings with European leaders and allies. Western countries are bolstering support for Ukraine as the war continues unabated. World Watch's Polina Lau reports.
In declaring Russian troops have committed war crimes, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken cited attacks deliberately targeting civilians, apartment buildings, schools, hospitals and a theatre in Mariupol. The State Department says the theatre was marked with the Russian word for children in letters visible from the sky. Beth Van Schaak is the Ambassador-at-Large for Global Criminal Justice at the US State Department.
We'll continue to track reports coming out of Ukraine of war crimes, and we will share this information with our friends and allies and with international and multilateral institutions as appropriate.
Mr Blinken says the US will pursue accountability, including potential criminal prosecutions. This comes as President Joe Biden arrives in Brussels for high-stakes talks with Western leaders, but he remained tight-lipped about his preparations ahead of travelling.
What would you like to say to European partners?
I'm going to say that to their face. I'm going to say all I have to say, I'm going to say when I get there.
In a packed schedule, Mr Biden will attend a NATO summit, meetings with the European Council and the G7. Almost 4 weeks into this war, the US is working to bolster alliances. NATO is stepping up its commitments. There are already around 40,000 troops stationed between the Baltic and Black Seas. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says member nations will be deploying more troops in Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania and Slovakia.
I expect leaders will agree to strengthen NATO's posture in all domains, with major increases to our forces in the eastern part of the alliance, on land, in the air and at sea.
The UK is expected to announce $47 million of funding to help pay Ukrainian soldiers and pilots. Prime Minister Boris Johnson will also provide Ukraine with around 6,000 extra missiles. Further sanctions will be rolled out, with US officials saying they'll target Russian political figures and oligarchs. In Ukraine, the war rages on and there's no sign of Moscow changing course. Ukrainian forces have gained back ground in counterattacks in towns west of Kiev. Here's the mayor, Vitaly Klitschko.
The aggressors have plans 3 weeks ago to be in capital, to be here, because it's the heart of the country. And a lot of attack from north and east right now to our city. Everybody's surprised how tough Ukrainian army, how tough Ukrainian soldier, because we stand in front against this one of the strongest armies in the world.
The US is warning Vladimir Putin has yet to exercise his full playbook, and Russia could begin using chemical weapons. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, is warning of the need to send experts and equipment to Ukraine to reduce the risk of a nuclear accident.
Now to a David and Goliath struggle between a small picturesque town in regional Germany and fast food giant McDonald's. The tiny town of Tübingen near Stuttgart has just 90,000 residents, and they're committed greenies with more bikes than Copenhagen and free buses at night and the weekends. This year, the local council brought in a new tax on takeaway food packaging, and the town's only McDonald's responded with a lawsuit. It's suing the city. Reporter Louise Tanuth spoke to author and freelance writer Shrishti Chowdhury, who lives in Tübingen. She started by asking what the town is like.
I always say, welcome to the fairy tale. It's like this little fairy tale small town. It's full of students. 1/3 of the population is dominated by students. It has this old town which has been completely preserved. The university dominates the landscape. So, of course, there's this young vibe all around.
It really does look like Disney, just looking at some of those pictures. They have a huge commitment to sustainability. Tell me about that.
Well, ever since I've moved here, this was 1.5 years ago, I met a lot of people who are either vegan or vegetarian. Even if they're not strictly so, they wouldn't really make meat at home. It made me a bit curious. How is it possible that in a country which is known for its sausage, there's just this big green movement going around? And when I tried to look deeper into it, I found out that actually Tübingen has been a green city for several decades now.
Yeah, and obviously that extends to this tax on disposable packaging. So tell me, how does that work?
This is a tax which imposes 50 cents extra every time you have to buy something which is just one-time use. So if you buy a coffee cup, an ice cream bowl, even a pizza box, you will have to pay a bit extra. I noticed that people would just bring their lunchbox to a place where they would want to take away food. On any normal day, I would have taken away a cup of coffee. I now try to sit there and have it, or I try to have this re-cup in which you can have this cup and pay €1 for it, and then once you're done, you just give back the cup and then you get your deposit back. The government has helped quite a lot in getting the local businesses to buy dishwashers, to help them buy reusable cutlery, and it's been really quite cool the way everyone just took this in stride and said, yeah, fine, if I can't have the ease of taking my coffee on the go, I'll just change my habit. Already we've heard that in the first couple of months, there has been 15% less waste in the city's waste bins.
Where is the update on the McDonald's case, and is it likely to be successful, do you think? And have they had much backlash, considering, by the sounds of it, most people are for this tax?
Our mayor sounds super confident that he will win this case, because McDonald's also tried to block a similar tax in the city of Kassel about 25 years ago, and they won. But this time, our mayor, he's pretty sure that we will win because the federal law has been changed, and McDonald's cannot and actually should not block such a move because, of course, it's for the environment. And if even small businesses can change, and for them it's so much more hard, then the big ones should have the commitment to do so as well.
And that town is truly picturesque. Take a look at our website for some of the images. Madeleine Albright, America's first female Secretary of State, has died at the age of 84. Former President Bill Clinton, who appointed her to the role, called her extraordinary and says her death is an immense loss to the world. Our correspondent Simon Marks reports.
Madeleine Albright arrived in the United States at the age of 11 after her family fled first the Nazis in Czechoslovakia, then the Communists. When President Clinton picked her to be America's ambassador to the UN, she would later recall during an appearance at TEDx that it wasn't easy.
I'm sitting there are 15 members of the Security Council, so 14 men sat there staring at me, and I thought, well, you know how we all are. You want to get the feeling of the room, and do people like me, and will I really say something intelligent? And all of a sudden I thought, well, wait a minute. I am sitting behind a sign that says the United States, and if I don't speak today, then the voice of the United States will not be heard. And it was the first time that I kind of had that feeling that I had to step out of myself in my normal kind of reluctant female mode and decide that I had to speak on behalf of our country. And so that happened more at various times, but I really think that there was a great advantage in many ways to being a woman. I think we are better a lot at personal relationships and then have the capability, obviously, of telling it like it is when it's necessary.
Success at the UN saw her promoted to the State Department, the first woman to hold the post of Secretary of State. Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice would soon follow. In office, Albright backed NATO's expansion and pushed the White House to respond more intensely to the crisis in Bosnia and take a tougher line against the Serbs. She believed with every fibre of her being that the world would be more peaceful if more women pursued careers in diplomacy, politics and statecraft.
I do think when there are more women that the tone of the conversation changes and also the goals of the conversation change. But it doesn't mean that the whole world would be a lot better if it were totally run by women. If you think that, you've forgotten high school. So the bottom line is that I think that there is a way when there are more women at the table that there's an attempt to develop some understanding. I think we're better about putting ourselves into the other guy's shoes and having more empathy.
And your thoughts on potentially returning to offices in the CBD. This listener says Phil Goff doesn't seem to have picked up on how fundamentally workplaces have changed, but also workers' demands. Many of us have zero interest working in open plan offices anytime soon. COVID and office politics aren't exactly enticements.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The Immigration Minister says Australia rekindled New Zealand's 2020 offer to take some refugees being housed in detention camps, and Cabinet signed off on the plan a month ago. New Zealand will take 150 refugees annually for 3 years from Australian detention centres. Australia has previously rejected the offer, citing concerns refugees could claim Kiwi citizenship and then return. Chris Farfoy has told Checkpoint that over time the refugees will become citizens, which should give them the right to go to Australia.
Our express will and request is that all citizens have the same rights if they've got New Zealand citizenship. There's obviously an issue that Australia is working through. The border decisions around entry are theirs, and I think we'll leave that discussion for them.
The UN Refugee Agency will screen prospective refugees. Civil Defence in Tairawhiti says it's still unclear how many homes have been damaged by the torrential rain of the last 2 days. Te Puia, Tokomaru and Tolaga Bay have borne the brunt of the weather, which forced 150 people to evacuate. A Civil Defence spokesperson says staff have been out assessing properties today, but have been unable to reach some communities still cut off by damaged roads and flooding. State Highway 35 will remain closed overnight between Gisborne and Potaka. Waka Kotahi says contractors are working to open the road between Gisborne and Tolaga Bay. It may be days before the full scale of the damage to property in Tairawhiti is known, as more slips are likely. David Wilson of Civil Defence says staff have been inspecting damaged properties in Gisborne, Tolaga Bay and Tokomaru Bay today.
But we're also aware of some properties out on the Poverty Bay flats out at Manatuki and out towards Tikaraka that may need some inspections as well. But just working with homeowners when they're ready and just as people start to go back into their houses. So that will kick in full swing into that tomorrow and probably early next week as well.
David Wilson says some damage does not become apparent for a few days as sodden ground continues to move. Power is back on for hundreds on the east coast. A number of power lines and poles were down across Tairāwhiti and Wairoa yesterday, leaving 755 households without power. Eastland Networks says 180 of its customers are still without electricity. The biggest fault is in Raupunga, which is affecting more than 160 people. Eastland Networks says access difficulties have made repairs difficult. With more heavy rain forecast for the Hawke's Bay, State Highway 2 between Wairoa and Napier will remain closed overnight. Contractors have been working to clear the road, but slips and rockfall remain. State Highway 38 northeast of Frasertown will also remain closed overnight. A number of local roads in the Wairoa district are shut due to flooding, slips and fallen trees. Schools and early childhood services in Waikato and the South Island are reporting big increases in COVID cases. But in Auckland, the number of infected teachers and children has nearly halved. Our education correspondent, John Gerritsen, reports.
Education Ministry figures show schools and early childhood services have reported 64,455 cases affecting staff or children in the past 10 days. That's about the same as Thursday last week, but where those cases are occurring has changed dramatically. In Waikato, the case count has doubled since the same time last week to nearly 9,000, while in Canterbury it's increased more than a third, and in Otago Southland by nearly 2/3. Meanwhile, Auckland still has the most cases of any region at nearly 13,000, but that's nearly 10,000 fewer than Thursday last week.
President Biden has arrived in Brussels for an emergency NATO meeting and G7 summit to discuss Ukraine. NATO is expected to agree to deploy troop reinforcements to Eastern Europe, and Britain says it will provide thousands more anti-tank missiles to Ukraine. The BBC's James Landale reports.
Britain's already given Ukraine 4,000 anti-tank weapons. Now Britain is to send Ukraine another 3,000. These could include anti-aircraft weapons. But crucially, Number 10 said the UK would also now help Ukraine with intelligence and longer-range targeting. That suggests potentially other uses for the missiles. Boris Johnson will set out the details at today's NATO summit, where he'll urge other leaders to provide more military support for Ukraine. The UK will also give Ukraine £25 million to help pay the salaries of its armed forces.
And it's been revealed the former wife of one of the world's wealthiest men, the Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, has donated more than $1.4 billion to charity in the past week. Mackenzie Scott gave much of the money to the Planned Parenthood organisation and affordable housing groups. She's pledged to give away most of her $71 billion fortune. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a child's perspective on the COVID-19 pandemic as interpreted by Julie Spray, who's been interviewing and making comics on the topic with kids from Tamaki Makaurau. Our changing world tackles the energy problem, as in how to get it without overheating the planet. And Ricky Livermore is getting ready for the Poetry Slam at Your Place Grand Finals next weekend. Because your place is our place. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. For Northland and Auckland, partly cloudy, isolated showers that are clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon. For the Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, Taupo, Waitomo, Taumarunui and Taranaki. Scattered rain at times, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon and becoming mainly fine. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Taihape, periods of rain with some heavy falls from Wairarapa to southern Gisborne. Whanganui to Wellington, scattered rain clearing from tomorrow afternoon. A few showers are forecast for Nelson, Buller and Westland, but they're clearing this afternoon or evening, and it's mainly fine tomorrow. Fine and cloudy periods for Marlborough and Canterbury. Rain or drizzle is developing this afternoon or evening, and then clearing tomorrow morning. Fiordland, Otago and Southland, partly cloudy. Rain's developing in the west and south tomorrow morning, and there are a few showers spreading to Southland and Clutha from tomorrow afternoon. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy weather, rain developing tonight. The time is 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Almost a decade on, Australia has accepted an offer from New Zealand to resettle hundreds of refugees from its controversial offshore detention centres. The deal will see Aotearoa take in 450 refugees over 3 years from Nauru and other makeshift detention centres as part of our refugee quota. In 2013, Australia adopted a policy preventing anyone arriving by boat ever settling in Australia. Instead, the asylum seekers were imprisoned in controversial offshore detention centres in Nauru and Manus Island. The centres were widely criticised for being inhumane and illegal. But despite this newly minted deal, Australia is sticking by its original policy, adding anyone who arrives by sea from this point on won't be considered for settlement in New Zealand. And joining us now is Meg Duron from Amnesty International. Kia ora, Meg. Is 450 refugees enough?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, honestly, what a huge relief to have this deal done. 450 is definitely better than zero. And it's been a long fight for many, many people. And, you know, huge congratulations to Minister Whafoi for finally getting the deal across the line.
Although a number of people will agree with you about taking in these refugees, are we enabling Australia here to continue on with behaviour that was widely criticised as inhumane and illegal?
So Amnesty International found that what Australia was doing amounted to torture under international human rights law and standards, and their offshore processing is abhorrent and their Operation Sovereign Borders is abhorrent. But the most important thing here is these are people's lives, and there are so many courageous, amazing, resilient men and women and children who have been through these horrific policies that Australia has been using. So our top priority has to be seeing them to safety. And so I'm incredibly proud that New Zealand will be stepping up and supporting these people to have a return to a normal life of some sort. But Australia can't be allowed to get away with the way it's treated these people.
And so how can it be held to account?
Well, so absolutely international pressure has to continue. UNHCR has to continue Australia's, pressure on Australia to prevent this from continuing. So Nauru must be closed, and their insistence on opposing the Refugee Convention's principles has to continually be called out.
So people will probably remember the conditions around Nauru and Manus Island, but there is a reference to people coming from temporary processing centres in Australia. What are those?
Yeah, so this deal covers people that are on Nauru, but not people who are in Papua New Guinea. And it covers people who are currently temporarily in Australia. So Australia had to medically evacuate people from the islands because some of them were so unwell after all of the years of neglect and abuse. So they've been housed in motels and hotels and in facilities in Australia. So some of these people will be coming directly from Australia.
Yeah, and so when we say housed in motels and hotels, we're not talking luxury here. It's like being locked up in MIQ for years on end.
And forgotten. Locked up, forgotten, denied your rights. It's been abysmal. And these are people that were fleeing war and persecution in other countries. So, I mean, I guess when we're looking at the outpouring of support for people in Ukraine at the moment, many of the men and women who fled were fleeing similar unrest and persecution in their home countries. So it's no different a situation, really.
Meg, some people will say, how can you be sure that they are all genuine?
So all of the people that come to New Zealand will go through the same rigorous checks that any other person who comes to New Zealand as a refugee goes through. But these men and women have already been checked and found to be genuine refugees. UNHCR is referring them. So New Zealand will check them again, as we do. We have a very thorough and well thought of system. But there's no question that these people deserve security, as we all do, and deserve protection under our Refugee Convention.
Have we got the infrastructure to support them? Because I imagine that some of them have suffered horrendously and will need significant help.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with officials today, Lisa, and they assured us that they will get all of the assessment and support that we provide to people coming here through the refugee quota system. I mean, obviously that's not always perfect, but many, many amazing people work in that system, and they will do their utmost to ensure that they have adequate access to mental health provision and to healthcare, as anyone should have through this system.
In the joint media statement from the Australia and New Zealand governments, the Australian Minister for Home Affairs says that Australia's strong border protection policies had not changed and that no one who attempts to travel to Australia illegally by boat will ever settle here. And then they go on to say that anyone who arrives from this point onwards will also not be considered for resettlement in New Zealand. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, I've been working on this issue for 7 years, Lisa, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton, all of the officials who have been involved in Operation Sovereign Borders and the policies around this should hang their heads in shame. They're breaking international law. They're preventing people from accessing their human rights. It is abominable that they're getting away with it, and we absolutely shouldn't allow it to continue. And I think voters in Australia are starting to realise they had suffered because of these abhorrent policies, and their reputation has been impacted.
Thanks for your time, Meg. That's Meg Duron from Amnesty International there. Tonga's economy is being hit by a severe downturn with both exports and local sales in decline. In January this year, a volcanic eruption sent tsunami waves and ash rain that devastated the nation, leaving 3 dead and $130 million in damages. And now an Omicron outbreak has kept the kingdom in lockdown since February. Whenua Fonua reports.
It's already been a long and tough year for Tongan farmer Gimi Afiaki, whose business once thrived with weekly coconut and taro exports. Today, he and his workers are husking over 2,000 coconuts for a container destined for Australia. It's only the second container of produce he's managed to export this year. The livelihoods of commercial farmers in Tonga are at risk, and Afiaki, like many other farmers, blame Tonga's current border closure and lockdown restrictions.
You know, if our government doesn't come up with initiatives to support us, then, I have no choice but to work. I'm not a government employee. I don't get wages for staying at home. I don't want people to die from this disease. But, yes, we have to work. We have to make money. So you've got to weigh up the risks. Look at other countries. Everyone else is starting to go out of lockdown and just, we've got to live with it.
Tonga's lockdown measures have been getting tougher since the kingdom's first reported COVID deaths. On Sunday, the government enforced more restrictions, requiring people to self-isolate and all businesses to close down for a week. Farmers have been allowed to tend their crops but have no one to sell it to. Minoru Nishi, owner of Tonga's largest exporting company, Nishi Trading Company Limited, says his business used to buy produce from over 100 farmers. That's now dropped to 53. He worries about the impact of lockdowns on the mental health of farmers, many of whom are paying off loans.
So it's adding the pressure on a lot of our farmers and families at home. Some of our farmers in the agriculture sector solely rely on their farms for their livelihoods. And when there's a lockdown like this and they can't get to the farm for harvest or maintenance of their crops, it really is a difficult situation for them. And given that a lot of them also have loans with the government bank and other commercial banks, it's a huge burden on families.
Another unexpected challenge disrupting Tonga's local economy has been the sudden and massive arrival of food aid into the country. Containers full of bulk foods sent by donors from all over the world has become stiff competition to local vendors and retail. Local retailer Lineni Talanoa Tao says her family business has suffered since the eruption.
If people don't come in, you're not going to, they're not going to buy your goods and you're not going to get any money to pay your suppliers. So, I used to order a lot of stuff from my wholesalers, but I can't order stuff that I used to order previously. I don't have the money or the finances to afford to pay off my suppliers.
There's been an outpouring of support for Tonga's recovery, from satellite terminals donated by the world's richest man, Elon Musk, to millions of dollars in funds and material aid from other countries and NGOs. Just last week, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization announced a $1 million project in collaboration with the Tongan government to revive the kingdom's agriculture sector. But neither Nishi nor Afiaki know any details about the project. Nishi says the commercial farming sector is not being prioritized.
The government's got a lot of tractors coming in from aid from China, but not everybody is going to get access to that. So that's going to be distributed to town offices and districts throughout Tonga, but whether there'll be enough to cater for the commercial sector, with the commercial, semi-commercial and commercial farmers, which is a bulk of them supply a lot of the food to the local market, and also our exports. You know, they need that kind of assistance.
Resort owners whose business were completely destroyed have received about $3,000 in emergency funds, and businesses have also had discounts on recent power bills. Talanoa says she's under pressure to pay off debts.
You know, if the government talked to banks to be a bit more flexible in allowing us to make our loan payments. We also have to pay off our CD tax and pay off the inland revenue on a monthly basis. So, during this time, it's quite difficult, you know, trying to juggle everything and trying to get money to pay off everybody.
Many businesses say more help is needed as Tongans come to grips with the pandemic 2 months on from the devastating tsunami and eruption.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The United Nations says more than 6 million Ukrainians have been internally displaced by the war. They've fled their hometowns but not their country. Many have taken shelter in the relatively safe western city of Lviv, but some have now decided to travel back home. The BBC's Lucy Williamson has been speaking to people as they begin their return journeys.
Well, here on platform 3 at Lviv Central Station, the crowds of people are loading their belongings and their children onto the train. That's nothing new, you might think, but this train isn't heading to Poland. It's heading back east towards the conflict zones. Standing outside carriage number 13 is Olga, a history teacher from Zaporizhia, waiting until the last moment to board. She's scared to go back, she says. There's been shelling in areas around Zaporizhia. But my husband is there, she tells me, and it's my home. Mingled in among the refugees, police load body armour plates on board. 2 soldiers heave up a generator. Elena is watching from the opposite platform with her 12-year-old son Yaroslav. She's been separated from her husband and parents for weeks. Now waiting for the train back home to the central city of Dnipro, she tells me that the hardest thing is staying psychologically strong. Further along the same platform, Anatoly is waiting for the train to Kharkiv, a city that's been pummeled by weeks of Russian shelling. But his mother is sick, he says, and he has to go. Again and again on this platform today, the same story. Russian shelling has destroyed cities and ended lives. But families are the thing it cannot break.
Poland has welcomed more than 2 million refugees from Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion. People have shown a huge amount of generosity to those fleeing the war, but there's also anxiety about Poland's own security. The government's already announced a significant increase in spending on defence, and today it announced it's expelling 45 Russian diplomats after accusing them of espionage. The BBC's Dan Johnson has been finding out how people are feeling 4 weeks into the invasion.
On the car park of an army base on the edge of Krakow, new recruits are signing up to Poland's territorial defence force. 150 here in the biting morning cold, hundreds more across the country. And there's a new generation joining the ranks, like Patricia, a 26-year-old factory worker.
If something happens in Poland, I don't want to feel helpless. I'm willing to defend the country, and I'm not afraid.
Pavel was in the army before becoming a builder. Now he's back as a volunteer.
Every man and woman should fight for their country because it's our home. Our home is our fortress. We have to fight for it. It's our duty.
Applications are up 7-fold, and the colonel, Marcin Sozinski, wants even more.
There's a surge of patriotism. It's a new feeling for some people, and the situation on the border is fueling their decision to join up.
So yeah, I've got the car full of petrol.
Across town, Michael McSperrin's instinct is flight, not fight.
Packs of water, a rucksack ready to go, and
his bags are packed and his car's ready to head west if he feels he and his Polish family is at risk.
Putin's clearly out for something, and it makes you worry what's going to happen next. I was here in Poland when he invaded Georgia. I was here in Poland when he invaded Crimea. So I've seen it escalate, and it doesn't look like it's necessarily going to stop with Ukraine.
Michael's got a 2-year-old son and 2-month-old daughter, and his wife Paulina feels the worry of war coming over the border running through generations.
My parents, they told me that that my grandparents, they feel like everything's coming back, so they're definitely more anxious than we are.
Krakow's main square is ancient, beautiful, and it's busy with tourists. The only hint of these uncertain times is the groups of American soldiers out shopping or sightseeing in uniform.
Do you feel safe here?
Yeah, I really feel safe here because, Poland is in NATO, so I think we are protected.
I don't know what I should think about it because this is many information, fake news, and I'm a bit confused.
This abandoned bunker beneath a Krakow hospital, built in the 1950s, is a reminder of layers of troubled history just beneath the surface. Poland's been pulled east and west through World War trauma, Soviet subjugation and Cold War tension.
People had come to believe this sort of thing was way behind them now, but bitter national experience means this country's unease is deep-rooted, and despite the reassurance of being a NATO member in the European Union, there is anxiety, and it's growing.
Let's get to some of your feedback on New Zealand taking 450 refugees over 3 years from Australia. Now, these are people who have been in offshore detention centres, Australian offshore detention centres. One listener says we need to make sure that these refugees are sent to Hawke's Bay, BOP, Horowhenua and Nelson, where there is plenty of seasonal work and chances to integrate into New Zealand society instead of Auckland. Another person says, welcome to the refugees. They are our people. And Veronica's got in touch to say, and this is a reference to a texter that we read their message out earlier, saying how uncharitable of a previous texter. These refugees have been through hell. They include children. They're not staying in hotel conditions on Nauru or Manus Island, more like a detention camp. Children as young as 6 have taken their own lives while detained there. Surely we are more humane than white Australia. The refugees we have taken have proved to be on the whole amazing people and wonderful additions to New Zealand culture. I think they should be additional as well. That's from Veronica. Thanks for your feedback. There's been a shock reaction around the world to the retirement announcement by the women's #1 tennis player Ash Barty. Speaking publicly for the first time today, the tennis star says the timing is right.
Different things have happened in my life and that have changed my perspective, and timing is everything. I'm a big believer in that, and I think after the Australian Open, I was really hoping that we'd get the opportunity to play a home Fed Cup tie, but that wasn't meant to be, that wasn't the case, and I just knew that for me the time was right. I'd given absolutely everything that I could to this sport, and I knew that it wouldn't be fair to my team and the people that have invested so much time and energy into my life to not be 100% committed for them. So it's been a hell of a journey. I wouldn't change a thing, and I certainly have no regrets.
The 25-year-old is leaving the sport to chase other dreams, and as the BBC's Simon Atkinson reports, the news has left the champion's legion of fans devastated but also proud.
She's one of the most marketable stars of the game and insists she's leaving the sport proud and fulfilled. Ash Barty is the reigning Wimbledon champion and earlier this year won her home Grand Slam event in Australia to the delight of her legions of fans here. But then, on her Instagram account came this shock announcement.
I'll be retiring from tennis, and it's the first time I've actually said it out loud, and it's hard to say, but I'm so happy and I'm so ready, and I just know at the moment in my heart for me as a person, this is right. And I know I've done this before, but in a very different feeling, and I'm so grateful to everything that tennis has given me. It's given me all of my dreams plus more. But I know that the time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams and to put the rackets down.
Ash Barty says she wants to chase new dreams that don't necessarily involve travelling the world and being apart from her family. Here at her home club in Brisbane, the news has been met with a mix of shock and surprise, but also pride in what their local hero has achieved.
I love Ash Barty. The reason why I play tennis is Ash Barty.
And she's like so good, she's a freak, she just gets everything, she's so aggressive, great tennis player. She's amazing, there's no words for her, she's perfect.
I really liked watching her. I've seen that her grind and her fight to win every match she plays is really amazing.
Good job, 2 hands, you got it! Yeah!
Australia's Prime Minister also paid this tribute.
I particularly want to say thank you to you, Ash, for inspiring a generation of young people, and particularly a generation of young Indigenous people in this country. You are all class. Your commitment to excellence in your chosen field in tennis, you're a great cricketer, you're a great tennis player. I'm sure anything you turned your hand to, you are going to be a great success, and I have no doubt that will be the case as you go forward with the next chapters in your life.
Today marks Barty's second retirement from the sport, having walked away from the game as a teenager and briefly taking up cricket. All eyes now are on what comes next for a superstar who made her mark on the game she loves and has inspired young women in Australia and around the world to follow their sporting dreams.
And some final thoughts from you all about returning to offices rather than working from home. Bella's got in touch to say calls for us to return against the evidence of flexible working for health and wellbeing and the smaller local economies is treating public servants like we're only worth our wallets, like cattle, Bella says. And on the subject of McDonald's suing a small German town who's trying to take it to task over its takeaway wrappers and rubbish, discarded fast food rubbish is free advertising for companies like McD's, this person says, and a cost to local councils to clean up. It's a shame that the fast food chain couldn't demonstrate that they are team players by responding positively when communities move to clean up their streets instead of bringing out the strong arm bully tactics. That is about all we have time for. The late news, of course, will keep you updated throughout the evening. And if you've missed anything on the program or you want to listen back to something, then you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, fans are allowed back in outdoor stands and from this weekend. The boss of the Women's Cricket World Cup is on First Up. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The UN Refugee Agency will screen the prospective refugees New Zealand has agreed to take from Australian detention centres. New Zealand will take 150 annually for 3 years. The wild weather is moving into Hawke's Bay and is already cutting roads off around Wairoa. The police watchdog is investigating the recent protest and occupation at Parliament grounds. It's had 1,900 complaints. And the UK is promising to send